Hey everyone, it's Friday, so that means another video, and today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite rifles. I know I say that every time, but one of my favorite rifles, and that is the HK416. So for those of you who are new to the channel, I have been working on this build for quite some time. I think it's over a year, but yeah, I have completed it finally with the addition of the AAC M4-2000, which is the suppressor for this sort of build of HK416. You can kind of tell right off the bat that I painted it. That's in another video, which I'll link below, that I painted it in, kind of the AOR1, if you will, digital desert pattern. So for those of you who are aware, there is a book by one of the SEALs that was on the Osama bin Laden raid, which is, the title of his book is No Easy Day. And in the book, he posts a picture of a 416 in this camo pattern in a similar configuration. So that's kind of what this clone is based off of. So right off the bat, for those of you who have watched the previous Brownells 416 build video, you will know that this is a Brownells upper and lower receiver. So it has the pattern of the 416 lower, meaning the square magwell, and the the proprietary upper receiver, but these are all from Brownells. They're not HK German parts. I won't go into where they source them from because I don't really care, but they are basically a 416 clone, which Brownells did a really good job on. For those of you who have a Brownells 416 lower and upper, you'll notice that they don't come marked like this. It's for copyright or trademark reasons. But you can get it engraved at various places. Once again, I always go to Carlos at Engage Armament. I'll link him one more time. I can't say enough about him. So that's who did my 416 marking. So you can see that the markings make it look, pretty authentic, right? The HK 416 fonts and all that stuff, it looks really good. On the other side, the Made in Germany, all those markings look really good. So talking a little more about the base rifle, the HK416 quad rail is on this, and I'll go ahead and take off the quad rail to go ahead and look at the operating system, and we'll talk about this little guy, which is conveniently mounted directly to the rail. So before I take off the handguard, I want you guys to know a little trick. A lot of you may know this for those of you who have an actual 416 upper. If you have an MR556 upper, you'll notice that the nut that's retaining the bolt that's retaining the handguard doesn't have a cross pattern, but I'm going to show you guys a little trick if you have a cross pattern bolt. So what you'll do is you'll take apart the upper, and then you will use your bolt lugs as a tool. So you can kind of take them off like that. For the handguard is loose, and now you can slide off the handguard. So now that I have the handguard removed, I'll go ahead and talk about the mounting system of the flashlight, just because I know a lot of guys are curious as to how you do this, but it's actually really simple. So it just so happens to be that the scout screw placement on the bottom of the scout mount actually perfectly fits in line with the little slots in the HK handguard, which make it to where you can run a screw and a washer into the actual scout mount and directly mount it. I have experienced that it does come loose after an extended amount of time, and you can put some red Loctite, which I've put some red Loctite on the screws, and it hasn't come out for probably 6 or 7 months. So that's the way to do it, and that's a way that you can run it sort of at the angle rather than run it directly on Picatinny. And just kind of frees up some space, makes it more low profile, and it kind of gives that that look. Now I'm sure that I've talked about the operating system of the HK416 in the previous video, but I wanted to go ahead and touch on it just because now that I have the M4-2000 suppressor, there is something that's going to be very important with the operating system. So we'll go ahead and talk about how you take it apart. So as you can see, this op rod and spring assembly is all connected. It's much similar to the G36, that's where it's actually derived from, and it's actually the same thing as found in the M110A1, which I talked about last week. So to remove the op rod, you're just going to pull back on this black part and then lift up, and the op rod assembly is out. Now that that's out, we'll go ahead and take out the piston. So the piston is much like the bolt on an AR where it has the gas rings. This is actually the part where gas is released inside of the gas block. So this is the part where you can see is absolutely filthy. And I actually cleaned this rifle before I did this video. So yeah, it's pretty dirty in there. So I know you've all heard it before, and you're gonna hear it again. The HK416 is an overgas platform, just like the 417, but it's designed that way. That's how the system was engineered to be robust and reliable in harsh conditions and over extended amount of time. I'm not going to get into super fine details, but it is an overgas system. With that overgas nature, as soon as you add one of these, you run into problems. I have a video of me shooting someone's suppressed HK416, and yeah, the rate of fire was insane. It's probably like 1,100 rounds per minute, which is very, very high, very uncontrollable. So with that overgas nature and the addition of a suppressor, you need to do something to bleed off the gas in the system. And so that's why there are things called vented gas blocks. So the vent on the gas block is a 1mm hole, which is specifically designed for 10.4 inch barrels in mind. With 14.5 barrels, you're going to have different gas port, things like that. So the 1mm is specifically for 10.4. But that being said, that is just to bleed off excess gas pressure. So as the round is fired, and as the bullet goes to the barrel, gas goes to the gas block, pushes back on the operating system. An excess amount of gas is being pushed through the actual vent in the front, blowing out the front. I actually have, on the suppressor, you can see it's got a nice little black mark where the gas actually goes. So before we go any further, I want to talk about an issue that I ran into, which is very serious. And if you are the owner of a Brownells 416 kit, including the Brownells 416 barrel, I would strongly advise to check something because it's very scary. I was cleaning my rifle last week, and when I tried to remove the suppressor, I noticed that the barrel was actually moving, like this. So I'm not a gunsmith, but I know that's bad. So I contacted my favorite gunsmith, David Wilson, and he told me to send it in, which I'm very glad I did, and he found out this. So when you talk about an AR-15 barrel, typically the barrel extension is actually pinned to the barrel, which will prevent it from ever backing out. In this case, the Brownells 416 barrel actually came apart from the actual extension. So that's how I could move the barrel back and forth. I could kind of like unscrew it, and the barrel nut was still super tight. That being said, I didn't have any issues. I was firing it before. I never noticed any feeding issues or extraction issues or anything like that. But this is very scary because the thing that I was thinking about the whole time is headspace, obviously, around detonating in the chamber and it not being properly seated, not good. So David was able to torque it back properly, and I don't suspect any issues, but I'll always be conscious of that. So one of the things that makes this build distinct is the AAC suppressor. So typically the HK416 is suppressed by the 416 SD suppressor, which those of you who know, it's very similar to the M4-2000, slightly different configuration, and who knows if the internals are different because it's very hard to get them. So the M4-2000 is an old style suppressor. For those of you who have newer suppressors like Dead Air or Rugged or things like that, sound suppression has come a long ways. That being said, this is still a very respectable suppressor. It sounds great. One thing that I will complain about is this flash hider. One thing that I notice every time I fire this flash hider, especially unsuppressed, is I get this ringing sound. It's pretty annoying. It's kind of high pitched. I mean, you know, obviously you're not wearing ear protection when you're shooting it unsuppressed, but even with ear protection, you can still hear that ringing. So kind of annoying. With the suppressor, I can't really notice it, but I still can hear sort of a higher pitched metal sound. When I was going with the period of the Bin Laden raid, I wanted to go with the older style suppressors. So typically today you'll see that the 416s are outfitted with Surefire suppressors, which I have, but I wanted to kind of do a different period of clone, which, you know, the M4-2000 kind of fit. For those of you who aren't really into clones, but, you know, are very interested in suppressors, I would say this is a good suppressor. I would probably advocate for the 7.62 version, so the SDN6, just because you can have some more flexibility with the host. And one of my friends has one. It sounds really good on 5.56. The AAC suppressors are still okay. They're not the top of the line. You know, as you can see with their price, they're significantly cheaper than other suppressors. But I mean, they're respectable. I will say that the QD mechanism of the AAC suppressors is not the best. It's definitely the coolest. So one thing that a lot of people don't advise is to screw it on, you know, and ratchet it, just because the teeth will actually wear down on the actual latch inside the suppressor, and you'll have to get it replaced. AAC does that for free. It's not a big deal, but it does kind of suck sitting in your suppressor and not being without it. So let me just screw this on and show you guys what it sounds like. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of satisfying, but typically I wouldn't recommend screwing that on, screwing it off, doing that a bunch of times. Typically I don't ever take off my suppressors unless I'm, you know, doing a deep clean or something like that. So inside of my 416 lower, it's pretty much standard mil-spec parts other than the trigger. So for those of you who don't know, the HA416 comes with this little safety right above the firing pin. So what that does is it prevents from slam firing because the action of the 416 is really violent and it's prone to slam firing. So the actual trigger has to be a bob style trigger. So in this example, I have a Knight's Armament 2-stage trigger. Some people just run a full auto hammer, which does not make it full auto. So for those of you who don't know that, yeah, so that's a consideration if you're running with the firing pin safety. Some people take it out. I don't really see a need to, just because I run this trigger and it, you know, does fine. But that is something you have to be aware of if you run a standard, you know, a standard trigger in your 416 upper. It might have difficulty firing. So now that I have it put back together, I wanted to talk about some things that kind of make this build unique. And with that being said, we're going to be talking about the optics. This optic setup is kind of unique for its time period, just because it used to be, you know, kind of what everyone ran. So typically the go-to was the flip-to-side magnifier and the EOTech. So what that does is it provides you with a holographic sight for, you know, close target acquisition. It's fast, you know, it's bright, works under night vision, and then the flip-to-side allows you to have some, have some magnification in case you need to make, you know, a longer shot. So other than the aesthetic of the optic right here, you know, it being old and nostalgic, it kind of sucks. The batteries that it uses are in-cell type batteries, and they don't really last that long, and they're kind of obscure. You know, whereas a lot of optics nowadays just run the CR123s, this one does not. So that kind of sucks. The flip to side right here is kind of distinct just in the pineapple pattern you see on the optic. This is the first generation of EOTech flip to side magnifiers. And it's kind of characterized just by, you know, they call it the pineapple. It is kind of a metal housing, so there's not any rubber like you would see on a G33 or G43. Something that's kind of cool about this mount that comes with the Generation 1 EOTech flip to side is the quick removal of the magnifier. So if I flip this arms lever, I can quickly take it away, and now I can run the rifle without a magnifier. You might say, you know, why don't you just take it off? Well, you know, you have to have tools, things like that. You know, maybe you don't have time. Maybe you're running night vision and it's interfering with your your sight picture. So say, for example, you're passively aiming through a night vision, getting down on the gun is kind of hard when there's a magnifier in your way. So this is just a cool option for that purpose. So it's kind of cool to see that they thought that through. Well, thank you guys for checking out this video. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed the rifle. And I hope you will continue to support me. Like I said in the previous video, I'm going to be sticking to an upload schedule of once every other week. So be watching out for next Friday.